Welcome to field-based biomechanics. This is a concept I came up with after moving from coaching into the fitness industry, where I realized that the skills you pick up naturally as a coach aren't that dissimilar to the ones you need when you're training someone in fitness, but they're ones that are not common in fitness trainers. They're not necessarily taught that often or at all. In fact, I believe this is the only system that really shows you how to develop the eye of a seasoned coach or therapist, but in a short period of time. When you're observing movement, what you're really observing is how bones are moving, but you're observing that from the position of the skin. I've seen people draw muscles on skin to teach it, which, if you know movement, is just a ridiculous thought when you're trying to learn a muscle. If you really wanted to help, you probably draw bones on the skin, and even then, the bones moving under could be different to what's happening above, slightly at least. And so, what I'm trying to do is give you the ability to look at somebody and just observe where you believe those sort of focus points of bones are as someone moves through space without the need of technology, without having to set up movement analysis equipment. And although I'm not against movement analysis equipment, I'm realistic enough to know that when you get a client, you want to train them in the minute. The amount of feedback they get is important, but the speed that they get feedback is even more important. And I'm not telling you have to overcoach, but I am telling you that being able to see and then articulate what's going on in emotion is the skill of a very good coach and should be the skill of all trainers and strength conditioning coaches. Simply put, biomechanics is split into two parts. Kinematics, where you're talking about the motion of the body, regardless of the force, and kinetics, where you're talking about forces causing the motion or that the body has to handle. And so the majority of what I'm going to talk about in this sort of lecture is kinematics. There's some kinetics in there. I would describe kinematics as the majority of field-based biomechanics, and kinetics is more something I call rule the tool, which is handling force, whether the force is from your body or the force is external to your body. To become a field-based biomechanist, then what you need to understand is that you need to know what you're observing and you need to be able to document what you're observing. And so the sequence of events in a body simplistically would be bones move, then joints feel. By that, I mean the description that I give to a change of the angle at a joint is something I call joints feeling, because it's that change of, for want of a better word, squish at the joint. It's that change in pressure from one side to another that we describe as being a joint feeling. And that's really important because the descriptions that I often see confuse movement and position. And then finally, there's a muscle reaction to that joint feeling. Now, what causes the bone to move might be a muscle reaction, and that muscle reaction might be driven by a task. And that's not something that I'm denying at this point. This is something that we'll cover more, especially when you get into thinking about skill development, and even motivation, fatigue management. So, in the simplest form, when we're sort of we're observing bones moving, how that affects the joints, and how then the muscles respond. And that's what we're going to kind of focus on in this little lecture. Okay, so the first thing we look at how bones move in space. Now we have a chart for this we call the HMAC. I'm not going to get you to do this. I just use it as like I would use a dumbbell to improve strength in some movements, as you'll see later on. I use a HMAC to get people to ask the question repeatedly. HMAC is a word that strikes the fear into anyone faster because it's the thing that I insist on so that eventually my trainers get to keep thinking, just ask these questions. And the questions you're asking are just fairly, they're important, but they're simple. They're kind of yes, no answers. So if we look here, we're talking about the bones moving in space, and we're not talking in relationship to the body, we're talking in relationship to their start point. That becomes really interesting in things like locomotion. But in this is just a simple squat with Lee in his amazing studio up in Durham. Um, so what we'll see here is we'll see, look, all the bones travel down. So you'd ask, do the bones travel down? Or, and you'll be amazed at this one, they travel up. And we ask, do the bones travel up? And that's the first question, up or down. And usually you see all of it. Then do the bones travel to their left? Now all the bones are traveling to their left, even when it looks like they're not moving or they're moving relative right. Now they're all moving right. And then on this last one, question is, are they moving forward? Or, and this will really get you, are they moving back? We have loads of locomotion moves that we teach. None of them are that useful until they're really useful. And so there you were just seeing versions of the crawl where we took the rules of a crawl, which were arms pass each other, legs pass each other. We put them across 3 planes. Absolutely worthless task until you say, what is the outcome of my athlete? Let's put this together. Or I need to build something fun and cardio for this non-specific outcome session. Here it is. So the questions you need to ask, though, are the bones traveling forward or back, up or down, left or right? And that's all. And you just keep that in your head, and you'll end up with 3 of those. And that will start to determine what you see happening in the body. That's really especially important when you're looking at the thing or things creating the movement in the body, or that the body's trying to stop moving. So the next set of questions that I ask you to ask about bones individually, which, by the way, brings me on to an important point, which is terminology, is that I start to ask you about how each bone rotates around an axis. Now, I'm going to say here that I veer off the terminology that's used in research papers or anatomy. And I hate the thought that people then go, oh, that's because you're trying to be a guru. I'm not trying to be a guru. I am a guru. If guru is someone who tries to point someone to find the right info and then slopes off at the end of the film so the hero, the student, can actually prove they're better than the guru, I'm in. If guru means I'm going to get us all together near the edge of a cliff, get us to drink Kool-Aid and then jump off it, I don't want to be that guru, thanks. What I'm saying here is, with the bones moving, then I was saying forward and back and up and down and left and right, but you might hear anterior and posterior and those kind of things. That's good and important to know when you're in the research papers. I do cover that in my course. That's on field-based biomechanics. If you're watching this inside the level 4 strength and conditioning course, don't think that's relevant to you at the moment. You probably use that terminology anyway, and we will use it through the course. Here, I'm talking about rotation of bones. So I'm using 2 different bones in this video, pretty much for all of the different motions that we're going to describe. Again, I try and give you it's either one or the other, or potentially it's still. And the reality is, it's not still. It might be moving slightly. You might just say it's not relevant and ignore it. Both are valid, but it's just trying to work out what's what. Now, in this one, we're talking about anterior rotation, which the easy way to see that is just do a forward roll. Everything eventually is anteriorly rotating, or posterior rotation. Just do a backward roll and everything's eventually posteriorly rotating. Anterior rotation is the thing that happened. Rotating is the things that's happening. We want happening. Just to put more clarity on that, anteriorly rotated is the position it's in, but doesn't tell us how it got there. And so all terminology that you need to play with, but I'm just going, I know if it's forward or back or up or down or left or right. Now I want to know, is it anteriorly rotating or posteriorly rotating? And then the next one we'll look at is left tilting or right tilting, which in the text is left laterally flexing or right laterally flexing. Terms I don't like because I picture the spine. And when I picture the spine, I picture a change in angle at the joint, meaning flexing or laterally flexing. So I say tilt. The text quite often says flexing. And then I talk about right rotating and left rotating. Sometimes it's medial and lateral. I always talk right and left just to take the confusion out of it. And I'm not trying to teach you to write a biomechanics paper. I'm trying to teach you why it's important to know these movements as you see them. And the reality is, you can call a Mickey and Minnie Mouse as long as you know what they're doing, and then you can do something about that as a coach. So let's watch the video. So you'll see posterior is that backward roll, anterior is that forward roll. If you watch down, the foot did posterior. Right tilt is them leaning to the right. Left tilt is bones leaning to the left. Left rotation is the bones rotating to the left. Right rotation is the bone rotating to the right. And they're the things that we're asking. So now we have 6 descriptions of one bone, and that'll be one bone that when combined with another bone becomes the joint. Okay, so when we're talking about joints feeling, we already know the bones either side of the joint. The joint is like a squidgy bag. It's not real. Conspiracy. It is real, it's a thing, but really what we're talking about is the change in pressure or the angles around a space that's between two bones that becomes important when you know that muscles surround it and they're attuned to how things move. I know you've got capsules and all that kind of stuff in there, all that kind of junk. But what I'm trying to say here is that what we're interested in is how how this change of angle would be described, because we can then look at how a muscle would react. And in a normal circumstance, when we're looking at reaction to movement, not creating movement, seeing a muscle lengthen tells us that it's probably going to stimulate an opposite direction, which we'll talk about a bit later. When we watch this movement here, then we're looking at hip abduction. The person's facing us. The person's seen better days luck. We've locked them in a dark room and we've starved them, so they're just bones. What we're looking at here is we're going to be saying, right, what's proximal, what's distal? That will be the first thing. And all that means is we're just defining bones so that we have terminology we can come back to. When I teach this as a full course, we talk about the 5 different ways you can get the same one individual motion at the joint. In this diagram, I can show you, we're going to look at the most aggressive way of getting abduction, which is when one bone in a plane travels in the opposite direction to another bone in a plane. When we're talking about bones and we're talking about proximals and distals, we're just using that as points to help us describe what's going on. If I was to write it on here, then I would have to become good at using these tools that you get, and I'm going to have a go. So the pelvis would also be proximal, and then anything below it would be distal, and also anything above it would also be distal. And you'd have to imagine that the person is stood in anatomical position from the lower body down, but they're stood with their hands above their head up. That works best. So what the joint we're looking at is the hip. The hip joint is like the squishy middle part, and then let's use this. Look, is the squishy middle part here, and the bones that move either side. The femur. We're looking at the pelvis, and what we're looking at. This red line will show you what's happening in terms of. It'll give you an idea of the change in stretch here, or squish if you're looking at the other side. So we just press play, then you'll see that. Now, if you're going back to describing the bones, we can't really tell if there's a forward and back. There would be in real life in 3D. We can tell there's an up. They're all traveling up. We can tell there's a left. They're traveling to their left. We can see, we can't really see an anterior or posterior. There would be, but we can't see one. We can't really see a right or left rotation. There would be. But what we can see is that we can see the pelvis is tilting to the right. If it continued to tilt like that and brought the whole body with it, you'd see a right cartwheel. We can see that the femur is tilting to the left. If that continued to go that way, you would see a left cartwheel. If it really continued to go that way but down, you'd see that the whole of them being scraped through the floor in a cartwheel. Who knows? But the point there is the end result is that the joint gets stretched on the inside, which is abducting, even though the bones are traveling towards the midline, which makes some people confused and say it's adducting. Wrong. And so what we would say there is we'd say that's an abducting right hip, and it would be because the bones are traveling in opposite directions. If you could see the left leg, you'd see it's also abducting, but slightly, and that would be the distal traveling faster than the proximal, both of them tilting right. That's way more information than you need on here, but it is in the field-based biomechanics course. There's also available on the FASTER website, and I wrote. And so, knowing what the joint felt, knowing how the bones created that means we have now the knowledge to be able to recreate that motion, use it in exercise, and we also have the knowledge of which muscles will probably respond to that movement. And if we were given the task by somebody in rehab to then work on strengthening that movement, or we were given the muscle and told that that was weak in their performance or sport, we will be able to work back and start to produce exercises that take someone closer to a transferable movement in order to help them become robust at the thing they want to do. If you're watching this in the S&C course, then you know that's very important, especially when people have been shown in the needs analysis to need certain movements to be successful in their sport. But if you train people in everyday life, this can be equally as important. Where this skill is phenomenal but underrated is if you work with someone who wants to bodybuild and you need to work out how to isolate a muscle and make it the most important part of a movement so that you trigger growth. This kind of knowledge and this view on what's happening is vital. Now, if you're watching this video, I'm going to make the presumption that you know all the different joint feelings. And so I'm presuming that you know flexion and extensions and dorsiflexions and plantar flexions and abductions and adductions and lateral flexions and eversions and inversions. I presume you know all that. If you don't, there's this really good course called Field-Based Biomechanics, but also any of the FASTER courses cover this because we ingrain field-based biomechanics into everything we do to some level. Anyway, out of the sales speak into this. Joints feel. The reason for this part is that joints don't feel one thing. So you see one motion. If we have a look at this video, then what you see here is we're seeing abduction at the shoulder, but you're also seeing flexing at the shoulder, and you're also seeing a little bit of internally rotating at the shoulder. Because if we go through that again, if we look at this left shoulder, then if we just look at what the humerus does, because they're the T spine, as we call it, or if we actually call it pelvis. Pelvis is the shoulder pelvis. That is a whole can of worms I don't want to get into on this video, other than to say I apologize to anyone who's a pure anatomist. I salute you too. But if you're a general anatomist, well, I definitely salute generals, then you'll see that I use it as a teaching aid, not as a way of saying this is, this is actually what they use in science. And what I'm saying is, when you're looking at the shoulder joint, it's good to look beyond sort of just the shoulder. It's good to look as if you're looking at the pelvis. And when you learn the hips and you learn the shoulder, if you can visualize an upper pelvis, and we call arms upper legs, and that's a whole can of worms I wish I'd not just opened, then it's easier to describe the motions. So I'm going to say, presumptively, on a 2-arm press, that go on, I'll call it just for you guys, that the pelvis is staying still. And then, so really, I'm saying distal's moving, which is the humerus. So distal's moving and proximal's still. So when I look at this movement, what I'm saying is the obvious thing that's happening on that left arm is a left tilt, and that's causing the abducting at the shoulder, because you're seeing that there's a distance there. But also this elbow is traveling forward. I'll have the debate. And so that means that there's a slight posterior rotation of the humerus. And so that means that you're starting to get a shoulder flexing, small amount. So now it's abducting with flexing. And then the other thing that I'm seeing is I'm seeing a turn at the elbow. I'm seeing it turn slightly forward, which if I put the elbow down, then I would say on the left is rotating right. Now that's FTE. That a big course we run every year. Message me if you want to know. That's that level kind of depth. But what that means is that I'm seeing an internal rotation slightly. So I'm seeing a flexing, abducting, internally rotating movement there, where the majority of the work is happening abducting. And so I can start to say, if that arm was flying out of its socket and going on its own, then I'd expect the muscles that cause adducting to be involved. Because of what's actually happening, I'm thinking it's more something deltoid and others, let's call them friends, all helping that movement to be created. So this is the sort of depth that you don't remember you've gone into once you know this stuff. But it's really important. If you're trying to recreate motion, you need to see motion. And in the most simple of exercises, a seated shoulder press, there's possibly a lot more going on than you might have thought. So years ago, when I fell into this hole of overthinking joints, then I wanted to start to write out every different possibility at the joint. These are 8. That's more than 8, because you start to go in percentage of what move most. But these are the big 8 of the hip, so they're also the big 8 of the shoulder. And so we have 4 different things where flexing's happening. We have 4 different things where abducting's happening. 4 different things where internally rotating's happening. And then we have all the other combinations. There's 8 combinations there. If you go through all 8, you've hit all the muscles across that joint. if you put emphasis on one or two of the movements, then you'll hit specific muscles even harder than you might if you don't. Just for example, one of my bugbears is watching people tell me they're doing a glute exercise, and they are, but they're doing something glute medial, because although they're flexing, adducting, and internally rotating into the movement and then using the muscle to get them out, so extending, abducting, externally rotating, the movement is quite often some kind of ice skater. And if you watch the pelvis, when they land on the right, doesn't rotate over the right. It turns out to the left because they run out of space. So they don't get the internally rotating. They do get quite a lot more adducting, though. That makes it more of a glute med exercise, less of a glute max. The give normally is glute maxes hurt after the session, glute meds hurt in the session. Don't get me started on hip thrusts, because I'll be here all day, especially if you go, yeah, but I had a band and then I squeezed against the band. There's nothing wrong with any exercise ever, but sometimes there's something wrong with the description of why you're using them. And relax. So I don't want to go too far into force and force production and working with external kind of objects. I do want to talk about muscles and how muscles react and how muscles are used. So here I'm talking about sort of four different components that bring out a force from a joint. So if you were to throw your hand at someone, that's, by the way, why I'm terrible at punching. And I throw my hand like that rather than punch through, which is not like that apparently. I would like to apologise now to the martial artists and boxers in my company. However, if I do, then some of the movement might be chemically based. So, what that means is that it might be that the movement is produced because there's a shortening of the muscle due to ATP. It might be that it's elastic energy, so you lengthen the muscle and then it's shortened. It might be that there's some gravitational reason that you're producing a power there. Like if you're punching someone who's smaller than you might get some gravitational assistance for that speed, and it might be kinetic motion. It might be like, well, this arm's fairly heavy, this hand's fairly heavy. If you get some speed on it, then it brings its own momentum. If I hold a dumbbell, it brings more momentum. It's probably a combination of all those reasons that you're producing power. How you want to produce the power, how quickly you want to produce the power, what you're producing the power against, what might happen en route. They're all important questions to ask, and that will kind of tell you what muscles are involved. It's really important to know. Once you know this stuff, you're never going to be then second guessing yourself when you start working with people and you're trying to work out how does the muscle get involved. I've watched some great lectures where people explain what muscle's being worked, and you go and look at how the muscle crosses the joint, and you look at how the bones are moving around the joint, and you look at where the weight is loaded, and you look and you go, that's not true. So anyway, that's enough about the hip thruster. Or the cable weighted full punch. I also once watched an aerobics class where dumbbells were held here, and then they brought their elbows in, and then they said, pecs. We're putting the resistance in for pecs. But, you choose. So I don't want to talk too much about muscles, but I will do that in a future video if that's what you want. I'm probably going to do it even if you don't want to. I definitely do it on the courses. But I do want to talk about something that's important. So that is important, but something that's important to this talk, which is talking about how muscles react. So are they reactive? Are they proactive? And the answer is, yeah, they are. So muscles can be proactive because your body is constantly in this sort of like sense of fear that something bad might happen. And so it's trying to avoid that. But also it might be in a sense of need, and it's trying to get you to generate force to go and do something. And so that when you're talking about that, it's probably, if it's a proactive muscle movement, it's probably a chemical thing. If it's reactive, it's probably a combination. If it's the start of the movement, it's more than likely chemical. If it's because of a movement, it's more than likely to be the others. I had an interesting discussion on a punch. A lot of people work on shoulder strength to cause acceleration of their fist. But when I was talking through with one of the martial artists, and bear in mind, you already know I don't know what I'm talking about when he's punching. I rely on the coach to help. They were talking about the power comes from the foot, from the floor. And so we're saying, well, that's probably more a chemical thing. But by the time it's coming to the hand, the hand's kind of projected from the shoulder because of that movement. And so it might be that really the skill in the hand is controlling the movement and bringing it back. We're interested about the elastic ability, the controlling ability of the posterior muscles at the shoulder to hold the hand and pull it back so the next one can go, rather than the anterior muscles are pushing it out. That's the kind of discussion I have when other people are in the pub or when they're watching a film at the cinema or whatever you young whippersnappers do. What it did show, though, is that it's really important in this little talk for me to talk about something that I came up with to help people use this knowledge and put it into everyday life. And that's FAST's 5 skills, and there's actually 6 of them. So let me take you through those. So through years of being a coach, he says, calling to authority, if you watch my video on research, years of being a coach has meant that everything I now say is definitely 100% correct, and you shouldn't challenge it. Don't challenge it, because I am a guru. And if you leave your address, I will send you some of our Kool-Aid for when we meet up on a cliff. What I'm saying here is I found 5 skills that seem to appear in quite a lot of skills and seem to be useful, especially if you're trying to develop that coach's eye of what's going on. And these 5 skills I've named. So vertical displacement down really means folding up. Rapid change of direction means throw, kick, turn. Locomotion means traveling from one point to another. Reach means something where one segment of the body follows another segment of the body, follows another segment. Hello to my yoga people. And then training intention, where you're trying to move one body part while keeping other body parts still, or you're trying to move all the body parts while keeping one body part still. But what you're thinking is, John, show me some. Okay, you didn't need to shout that. So vertical displacement down, I'm going to show you something called a front squat. I'm not sure if you've come across a squat in the industry. Seems to be one of these obscure functional exercises. As an aside, by the way, I once had an argument with someone who said that older clients shouldn't do specific exercises, they should do general exercises. And then they said general exercises like a squat. But when you go in the research, a squat is a specific exercise for sitting down because, all exercises are specific. And so what happened was, one, by the way, if you're going to whisper, lean into your microphone, not the camera. But what happened there was people get a little bit hung up on exercises. They're just movements. And 2, going by their system, that means you have to take squatting out of older people's training when actually it's really good to help them sit down. What they were trying to make the point is you don't have to make the exercise super complicated because it'll be carryover from things that aren't complicated. That's kind of right. But what they wanted to also do is have a jab at a functional trainer that they'd already decided what one of those was. I'm waffling. This is a squat. It's a front squat. Jarrett's performing this because he's brilliant at them. And all we're saying is to have a good vertical displacement down, you have to have good range of motion across the joints. You'll see in this, there's a little bit of training intention, which is like the, I hope that didn't hurt your ears, which is a bit like what, where the spine is trying to keep some kind of resistance so that you don't just kiss the floor. So let's watch this really unusual exercise you've probably never seen before. Sarcasm's not really the thing I'm great at. I'm trying though. I'll get better. You'll see here that you're requiring 3 planes at the foot and ankle in order to allow the knee to release. The knee is moving into full flexion. It's getting hit in both directions. Imagine the quad's feeling this a bit. The hips getting hit in both directions. I'm just talking sagittal plane. So you imagine like hamstrings or glutes are getting hit quite hard. There's a little bit shoulder flexion, which is good because it's happening from the bottom up. It's not an elbow lifting, but it's a torso being pulled out of the way. All those things have to happen for a vertical displacement down. Once you see it once, you can see it in most movements. It's kind of cool. I think it's cool, but as we know, when you're in the pub, I'm sat talking about whether you're using chemical energy or in your upper body for a punch, because you know. So let's talk about rapid change of direction. This is a local park, and this is Justin, who's a real professional football coach and was a real professional footballer. So we thought, what better? Let's show a rapid change of direction using a throw. Football's the sport. That's why I'm in my coaching type top logo. And so when we're looking at a throw, what we're looking at is, can we get the pelvis to move in the direction that we want the power to go? And can we get that to happen before the limb moves? So we get some distance in the core, some distance at the limb that's moving in order to get hold of some of that elastic energy. That's why it's rapid, because it's elastic. This is going to be a throw, but you could use anything else. You'll see at one point you have the pelvis, I know, and you have the pelvis, and they're rotating opposite to each other in the sagittal plane, and it's a sagittal plane movement, and that's what loads that throw. I'm going to be quiet and let you really enjoy this. First one, nice and easy. I'm not that quiet, am I? Second one was better. You'll also note that the feet are having quite a lot to do with kicking that pelvis. That's important too. This is the basis of building a long throw, if you like. Brilliant. That's kind of a cool little drill. The red thing underneath his feet, you ask? That's something called the faster hub, with 2 different designs. There's a hub course. We call it a club. Buy once, stay in it forever. And I know that Justin uses it a lot. It's really good for making complicated exercises simple for the client, but that allows you to build things that are more sport specific more easily, or more activities of daily life more easily, where the client is just playing a game through numbers, but you know bones, you know joints, you know muscles, you know what you're trying to get, and so you use that to your advantage. I thought I'd choose a run for locomotion. Found an old video of Andy. I used the video of Andy. This is a different park. We're in the middle of the woods. I can assure you right now, and you'll see from the intensity in the run, Andy's not stolen anything. In locomotion, we're often trying to drive reactions in the body to get like this rhythmical movement. We're trying to drive here an extension by flexing the opposite hip. And then in a landing, we're trying to drive the legs to sort of scissor together. So it's like a slip motion. So we're going slip and then drive triple extension, but all through reaction, not through push. This is called like a forward facing run. It's like a forward pull run rather than a push run, because that's how you run. That's what we're trying to do here. Most locomotion is about that. It's about skipping across the floor. It's about producing power, but not for a long time on the floor in order to move you forward. We got loads of these locomotion videos, crawling and skipping and shuffling and cruffling, and there's all sorts of things. But I wanted to show you Andy running. Again, don't need to really talk this through too much. Look how important his knee coming through is, though. That's quite a big thing. You probably want to see it again because it was fairly fast. But his knee coming through that's good. It's almost a comical run. And I'm making Andy run fully like geared up because we're then going to set the dogs out and see if he can get away through the forest. That might not be true. Okay, so now we're talking about reach. Now, this is a good point for me to tell you that everything we're doing when I'm describing skills is really, I'm talking about the sequence you would expect the bones to move in. So if we talked about vertical displacement down, we say we want to see the sequence that allows most motion at each joint. If I'm talking about rapid change of direction, we want to see a sequence that allows the pelvis to be projected in the way we want it to, the limb to then direct the force and then to produce the power. If we're talking about locomotion, we're talking about we want a sequence where we're being driven in the air by a limb that then is producing a reaction behind us that's some kind of push. And then when we're talking about reach, what we're looking for is we're looking for a ripple effect of one bone following the other bone following the other bone all around that initial sort of movement that causes the motion, where the caveat is that sometimes you get off balance and other muscles need to proactively react. So bones might move because of that. Quite often see that in a golf swing, something that I can break down and do at a later date if you want it, and write it down below or whatever you need to do. So let's watch this, which is a rotation reach. It comes from the left knee, and you'll see everything rotates left. There's not really much balance correction, and that's because Jarrett is a phenomenal athlete and really good at this. You might see that the just for the foot nerds, you might see that the right foot is trying to get off the floor, because by creating that rotation right, that right foot is starting to feel the conditions in the environment that will make it go into plantar flexing. Okay, so training intention is the last two skills, and that's why there's 6 skills for the faster 5 skills. Training intention is a bit of a word play. I do love a word play. Intention means that the body's has attention about it, but intention means there's an intention to prevent the forces that are happening to the body from moving the body. And so we talk about 2 intentions, where there's a limb trying to be still as the body moves around it, or where the torso is trying to be still as limbs move around it. You'll see in this one, it's about keeping the torso still. That doesn't mean that it won't move in space, but that means that we don't expect it to rotate so much in a way that will cause the joint to change angle. You'll see this as Emma in her studio. It's the studio slightly on a slant, which means if you're my age, you might think that this is the evil Leia in a Batman TV show. I can tell you now, that's not true. Emma is not evil. So as we do this, you'll see that Emma's brilliant at moving, is controlling that torso. So there's ever so slight movement. She's human, but she's doing that while allowing movement around her arm. And then that changing gravity is what's producing the force in the body that she's having to deal with. And she's fighting that. That's her intention. In the second one, what we're looking at is that both shoulders are trying to stay still. and the rest of the body are moving around them. And you'll see she's doing a really good job of that. And she even moves ahead to add to that. So the first one of those movements, when we're talking about intention, then we're talking about limbs moving, torso still. And then in the second one, we're talking about limbs still, torso moving. Now, what you'll find is when you start to put all these together, that you see multiple skills, what I call faster skills. They're not mine. I'm just, guru, drink the Kool-Aid. Not because of that, just I call them faster skills because they're things that I picked up as a sports coach through the years. But they can happen together. So, like when you're running, you might find that you want torso intention because you don't want energy escaping. Energy escape's a whole new thing that I can talk about later. You don't want energy escaping because you want an efficient run. But also at the same time, you want locomotion to happen. And initially, when you start, you need vertical displacement down if you're doing a sprint start. And to get out of vertical displacement down, you're going to need rapid change of direction to project you forward to get you going. So it's normally you see combinations of these and you can start to break them down, and that'll help you. If you're currently on the strength and conditioning course and watching this, then you'll know that that's a really cool thing to know because you'll be breaking your sport down into all the components that can then help you. Okay, I want to talk about kinetics, which is kind of rule the tool. Rule the tool is something I came up with to just describe the process of adding the force in last when you're trying to get a reaction and build an exercise. It was used in one of my friend's books that years ago. A guy called Adam Wolf. You should check it out. I wish I'd remember the name. Good guy though. You should read his book. Start to sound a bit. It doesn't matter. This is not politics, but good guy does what he needs to do. Good guy. Forget that. Anyway, more importantly, what I'm trying to say is rule the tool is something that I'll cover in another lecture. I just wanted you to understand that what I've done in this lecture is help hopefully you to start saying there's more to this movement that I see in front of me than just someone's doing it right or wrong. There's more to a sagittal plane movement than the sagittal plane. That it learning your joints and muscles will become more important when they become important to how you do your job. And if you're drawing muscles on someone and watching them move upright, stop doing that, silly. If you're trying to work out biomechanics by stopping someone, filming them, stopping them, drawing them up and feeding back to them, you might be wasting valuable coaching time when you can see it and change the thing happening. I also peppered this with like sales for other courses. You can ignore that if you like. And if you don't like and you want more courses, you can go to the website, hit the WhatsApp, you'll come straight through to me and we can have a chat about all this. Feel free to comment and like and share this. This video will be going into the strength and conditioning course. That's important. So hello, strength and conditioning people. It'll also sit on my Substack. I won't put it anywhere else. You can watch it on my Substack for 2 weeks until you need a membership. And so, and I'll keep adding to that as we go along. Thank you all for listening. I've took like nearly an hour of your time. And so you definitely deserve a pat on the back or whatever else you would do to reward yourself. Something that we might talk about when we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in a future lecture. Right, I'm off to buy a huge pack of Kool-Aid and find a cliff top. Bye.